Hello, everyone. My name is Candace Mueller, and I'm joined here in today's webinar by Rory Bradvent. And we are hosting a Generative AI Essentials for Marketing Leaders workshop. We've heard a lot of feedback from our clients around, what are the trends in generative AI for marketing leaders? And so this workshop is going to focus on those and then actually connecting you to the tools that we feel are kind of the leading tools in this space. And really, our goal is to empower you and your teams to start using those tools. So we're really excited to share this content with you today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rory in a moment. But first off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Candace, as I just said, and I've worked in many different companies focusing on product marketing and go-to-market initiatives, including Oracle, Salesforce, and also Freshworks, where we went through an IPO. Throughout this work, I've looked at how do we leverage technology in our go-to-market initiatives to maximize the value. Additionally, then I joined very high velocity SaaS companies and focused on their go-to-market initiatives as well. I'm joined by Rory, and he's going to introduce, I'm going to kind of kick it off and introduce him in a moment. But before I do so, let's cover some of the focus of today's session. First, we're going to focus on the trends. So I'm going to take you through what is the state of play in MarTech and generative AI. And then I'm going to transition and we're going to kick off with some of the tools for generative AI, including go-to-market planning and prospecting. And then we're going to cover marketing automation, content creation, visual design, and video production. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So Rory, I'd love to take a moment and introduce his experience. He's a digital marketing consultant with Go-Demand Gen with over 13 years experience working in both agencies, companies, and fast-moving startups. He's been working with AI technologies since the very beginning, well before this kind of explosion of generative AI. So with that being said, Rory, I would love to transition over to you to kind of share a little bit more about your experience and give us a little bit of a level set about what is generative AI.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the introduction, Candace, and thanks everyone else for joining. As Candace mentioned, I've kind of got a bit of experience in this AI realm. I'm a digital marketing consultant by trade, but I've kind of dabbled in everything in the digital marketing space. And over the years, from analytics to social media to websites to branding to strategy to everything in between. And eventually what happened is one of my clients was an AI client. They were developing an AI product. And this was well before the likes of ChatGPT came out and really well before, AI in general was something that we interacted with on a day-to-day basis. And so it's been really interesting watching this movement from AI being this really interesting kind of technology to being this thing that is so public and global and everyone suddenly knows about it. But the highlight really is on generative AI. I mean, ChatGPT, for example, which is really what started the storm, is a subset of AI. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Candace, I'll just touch on a little bit on what generative AI is. So in case, I'm sure you've all experimented with the likes of ChatGPT, but here's a quick and easy heuristic for thinking about what it actually is. And so generative AI essentially predicts what the next word is in a sentence or the next pixel is in an image. So what it does is it statistically, it looks at what word should follow the previous word or what's most likely to follow that word. And how does it know that? Well, it's trained on an unfathomable amount of data. So imagine you could right click on the internet and press download, and you can't do that. But imagine if you could, and you downloaded everything on the internet, then you fed it into this prediction machine that was really good at knowing what would come next. It looks at all the patterns, it looks at all the things that, where words seem to follow one another over and over again. And it gets really good at predicting that with some human oversight to tell it, here's what right looks like, here's what wrong looks like. Anyway, so it's so good at predicting what happens next. But now that you know that that's how it works, there are some inherent limitations. And so therefore it's better in some use cases than others. And today we're going to talk about what some of the best use cases are for that kind of technology. So Candace, I'll hand it back over to you to go through some of the trends we're seeing.
Perfect, Rory. Thank you so much. That's a really strong level set of knowledge because I think a lot of times we like to overcomplicate what is generative AI. How is it coming up with the answers or the output that based upon our prompts that we're receiving? But what I'd also love to do before we go into the actual tools themselves is to share with you some of the trends that we're seeing in generative AI. And what's really fascinating about this space is that a lot of our previous client work, is centered around looking at how are we adopting these technologies? How are we leveraging this technology as a game changer for marketing? We're seeing a lot of focus on driving cost savings through generative AI technologies. And also, some actual marketing leaders have very specific use cases. And we're going to talk a little bit about a little today further about how use cases are really critical in how you approach generative AI. So, really honing in on that is incredibly important. But some stakeholders have said, I've just been advised by my board or my C suite to discover this further. Well, by going through today's webinar, you're going to get a lot of insight that you can take back internally to not only empower your teams, but also to educate your other leaders across the organization. Some of the previous session feedback we've had is like, we need a lot more clarity. This session is helping us to get that ramp up to apply the tools for my team. Also, there's a lot of interest in continuously evolving and learning. And then also, how do we deploy consistent policies around generative AI? So it's a very broad topic, and we're going to really try to unpack a lot of that for you in today's session. So let's go ahead and get started with the trends. Well, the most important thing that we're seeing with generative AI is this explosion of new technologies. And for those of us who have been following the State of MarTech report by Scott Brinkner and Franz Ramirez-Ma, they've been publishing this report since 2011. It was already a very fast moving ecosystem of technology that had, as they quote, like 9.3% growth over the last 13 years. But just in the last year, we've seen almost a 28% growth in MarTech technology that's been fueled by generative AI. So the point here is that all of us together as marketing leaders are feeling a little overwhelmed. We're feeling like, how do we get a handle on this market and really make sense of it and really understand the use cases and how to apply that tools and all of that rich generative AI knowledge into our marketing organization? And if we really look at how that breaks down, that new innovation, we see kind of two main categories. The first category, which is really the explosive growth, is net new generative AI solutions. So all of us are very familiar with ChatGPT, the launch in November 2022 through OpenAI. If we look at agents, there's a native solution 11x where you can get an SDR agent or a sales process agent. Naro, from a sales enablement perspective, bridges marketing insights to sales execution to help you really hone your execution there through insights. But also, we see a lot of generative AI being embedded into existing solutions as the second category. So we're very familiar with Gemini, Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot. Salesforce just launched Agentforce, as well as HubSpot with Agent AI. And we're also seeing like Seismic and Gong, like this evolution of AI capabilities within the applications and the MarTech that we're using today. What's really fascinating, though, is 77% of the growth in this category has been through native AI capabilities. And this is because of the low cost to really enter into this market and start innovating. And so we're going to see this explosion kind of continue. And then the other thing I just wanted to share with you is that as part of Scott's and Franz's report, they actually came out with a new report in December, just a few weeks ago. And what they really had identified is that you really need to understand the use case in order to leverage these technologies. Instead of trying to look at all of the different things that these tools can do, there's a huge opportunity for generative AI to really assess and understand a rich and a vast amount of knowledge to produce a result. But if you don't hone the use case, then you're not really, it's going to really limit your potential. So what I've done is I've actually provided a link to this report in the presentation, because there's a lot of insights there as to how you can actually learn from the use cases of generative AI today. But that is really how we've also grounded our presentation. We're gonna kind of feature the use cases for each one of our different categories and the benefits of the technologies in those categories. So with that being said, let's go ahead and kick off with the actual tools themselves. So I'm going to kick off with generative AI planning, go-to-market planning tools. And some of the benefits that we see in this category is really around speed and scalability. How that happens is through a rich analysis of a lot of information that helps you then accelerate how you can synthesize that information and produce very specific go-to-market recommendations. And we'll see that through some of the tools. Also, you can go deeper into market and customer understanding. So you can actually hone richer insights through generative AI capabilities because of the same exact methodologies. It's like it's going further into understanding your customer profile. An additional benefit is being able to be much more targeted in your outreach, because you can understand customer attributes much better and be much more focused on your personalization. So let's look at some of the technologies. So Jasper is one of the technologies that's getting a lot of traction, not just for their market research, but it's because they bring a lot of breadth and depth into their generative AI solution. But from a market insights perspective, what they do is they allow you to go and do a lot of chat and discovery around your target ICP, your market, and then pull that forward in how you execute on your campaigns. Jetta AI also really assesses industry trends, and it helps you really to optimize like how you're looking at your go-to-market programs in an analysis. And it helps you also to really measure the performance of your execution to your target goals through the generative AI. Octave is a newer player in this space, and what it really does is it looks at building your target ICP and then assigning market insights and playbooks to execute upon, so that you can actually, be very focused in how you deliver a message or a program to that target ICP. So the benefits here is really around focused on delivering richer customer insights and research to analyze trends and provide go-to-market recommendations. From a segmentation and personalization perspective, Jasper is really, again, rich in this category. It can help you assess like customer segments. Breeze, which is HubSpot's offering, also allows you to really focus on over 40 different customer attributes, and really focus your content and your execution based upon that personalization of those attributes. And then Beam is a new technology for generative AI that's focused on structured go-to-market analysis. So it looks at target segments, and then what it does is it looks at really compiling a rich kind of go-to-market program, and then it looks at assessing results to like prospects. And then finally, target ICP analysis. Claude, many of us use Claude every day. It's very similar to ChatGPT, but what's really rich here is the power of the API. The APIs that they have. So they can integrate with a lot of different technologies, and then you can hone those insights as well as you develop your target ICP. The M1 project has something called a strategy generator and an ICP generator. So they're able to really look at, if you, based upon a lot of prompts, giving you a very focused strategy and a focused target ICP. And as I mentioned before, Octave really helps you really define that ICP based upon prompts, and then matches the playbooks based upon those customer attributes. So let's go ahead and look at some of the examples that we have today. The first one is with Jasper. So, when I log in and I type in the information that I'm looking to understand the motivations and objections of or objectives of a chief financial officer, it will produce this content for me and this insight. And so that's very ChatGPT-esque. But what's really powerful about Jasper is it allows you to create a marketing strategy or to write content based upon the insights that it's producing. Another example is segmentation and personalization through HubSpot Breeze. So what's really interesting here is if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, we have Bigalytics. You can assess over 40 different customer attributes. And then as you build your campaign, so because it's an integrated solution and your content, it's going to pull information and recommend content that meets those customer attributes so that you deliver much more targeted and personalized messaging. And then last but not least, we have target ICP development. So I'm using Claude in this example. And so I've had to be a little bit more prescriptive in my prompt, but I've asked it to provide the challenges, the key metrics, and to understand the organizational responsibilities for a chief financial officer in the legal industry. And it's provided all of this insight. Now, the value of Claude is that you can hone this and integrate this to different data sets through APIs. And so you're not limited. It's a very extensive pool of information that helps you then to further refine your target ICP. So what are the downsides that we have here? Well, when I went through these tools, there's a lot of information. So, a human really needs to distill that information and understand what is applicable and what is not applicable. Also, it was very formulaic. So I, have been working in product marketing for over 10 years, and good product marketing and good positioning is very human. It connects on a human level. And so this was very formulaic in how it responded. And then also there were so many tools to look at. And so as you build out your justification for using those tools, it actually becomes hard to justify the investment because, how are you going to get that long-term ROI unless you're using a more integrated tool set? It's also very reliant on high quality data. So making certain that not only within your own MarTech, your data quality, you have data enrichment and quality and governance. That's really important. But then you also have to be sensitive to the other external data sources that you're leveraging. And it requires human verification to make certain that what's being produced is accurate. And also a final consideration here regarding limitations is that these are beta versions of a lot of these products. So even HubSpot is very, forthright in the fact that their Breeze solution is a beta program. So just use them with caution. Now let's go ahead and take a look at generative AI prospecting tools. Now this is where there's some really interesting developments. There's much greater precision through these tools where you can actually hone the right message at the right time if your data is really buttoned up and you can serve that up through the insights you have in your data. I also like to call this the end of the cold call, which is where we have less information on trying to ask the SDRs or the BEDRs to find, but we're actually providing them with insight before they make the call. And then also you can actually potentially reach out and discover new markets, segments and prospects, because you can have that insight in your discovery to unlock those new opportunities. So let's look at some of the generative AI prospecting tools. A lot of these really center on prospecting intelligence. So Apollo AI is a data intelligence platform that supports you with data enrichment. And they have a vast amount of contact and account records that you can use to actually enrich your data through not only social profiles, web profiles, but it's going to give you a lot of great insights into your marketing database. Breeze also, as I mentioned before, allows for over 40 additional attributes that you can actually enrich and then pull that into your marketing campaigns through generative AI. Orem is a really fascinating solution. And what that does is it actually harnesses conversational insights that your BDRs are having every single day. And also, Clay is a solution that we see kind of across the board, but it really helps not only deliver data enrichment, but drive that personalization and how you support your leads through outreach. So these are really AI-powered sales and conversational intelligence platforms that allow you to pull in insights into your database that you can execute on. I'm going to close with one more, and that's POCUS. And what I like about POCUS is that it actually harnesses in-product or in-app insights, and we're going to see that today, that you can actually use to enable your SDRs and your BDRs for outreach. A lot of the second category is around personalized outreach. Jasper actually leverages a lot of those customer insights so that you can pull them into how you develop your campaigns and programs, as well as Breeze. Lavender is really focused on email intelligence and understanding which emails resonate the most with your AEs and customers. So then you can actually coach and upskill your other sales teams. And as I mentioned, Clay will really drive that data enrichment and prospect intelligence into how you execute. And finally, lead generations. One of my favorite tools is called Connect the Dots. This is where it's a social marketing tool through LinkedIn that helps you really understand and your sales teams understand who is connected across your company to target prospects. So it builds your referral engine across the board. And then I mentioned POCUS, and Seamless AI actually takes as a data approach to lead generation to help you bring in insights to help you drive digital signals and help your sales teams focus on the right leads. So let's look at some examples of these sales prospecting tools. The first one is a prospecting intelligence tool. So this is Apollo IO. And what we're doing here is we're looking at a generative AI sequence that's been recommended for a group of customers based upon what has worked well in closing existing accounts. So what it has done is it's assigned a sequence of, an emails, a call that has actually driven prior customers to close, and that's what you're kind of seeing here. So it's allowing that natural flow. What we have in the second example is a personalized outreach example. And this is where we are actually going in and we are asking the technology, which is Jasper, I want to build a landing page, and it's focused on these kind of customer attributes. What it's saying to us is, well, how do you can get a lot of clarity and relevance in how you build this by pulling together these pieces of content, and it's going to drive a higher conversion because it not only looks at the attributes and the definitions that we defined earlier, but how we're executing on it. And then finally, we have a lead generation example, and this is through POCUS. This is where we're looking at in-app usage. And here it's saying they're reaching a paywall. So, and they visited the in-app pricing page. We have a high level of conversion. So these are all signals that you can pull into your marketing outreach to proactively engage this customer for a renewal. So some of the downsides and limitations. Well, first off, in order to gain the real benefit of these applications, when I was at, you need to be able to have all of your sales automation processes defined, and your data needs to be highly enriched. When I was at Freshworks, we looked at rolling this out predictive, we called it predictive selling, where we would serve out predictive content to our sales force based upon what was in our database regarding the sales stage, the industry, what the pain points were. And we found it was a huge lift, and it was a huge lift to make certain that our sales teams kept that data current. Also, it requires a significant amount of training for the sales teams and the BDR teams because based upon these signals, they need to know what to focus on and how to take corrective action. The other limitation here is that it's very reliant upon data quality. So you're going to put a lot of effort in the front end on this to gain the value of automation. And it also requires human assessment to understand if you are taking the right action or serving up the right content that's appropriate to your customer segments. All right, now, Rory, I would love to transfer over to you or transition over to you for productivity tools in generative AI.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Candice. I'm just going to share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see it. My apologies. Yeah, so fascinating stuff in the go-to-market planning sector. So thanks for sharing that, Candice. And yeah, essentially these tools are helping you define your ICP with so much more clarity and definition and accuracy, and then being able to take that and turn it into something that you can execute on. So, personalizing the content for your prospects that should hopefully make your sales process, much smarter and more effective. I want to cover a few different use cases here. I want to talk about, your internal marketing team productivity. I want to talk about content creation. I'm going to talk about design and video. And I'm starting here on the internal marketing productivity side because this is where I think the most value actually is. I think a lot of people expect me to start with content creation and copywriting and creating imagery and that kind of thing, but that really only impacts potentially one team member in your team, the copywriter or the designer. But there are other tools out there that can, when you aggregate the time savings across your whole team, there's far more impact. So that's why I start here. And so, what these generative AI tools can do for your team is obviously, this is pretty obvious. They can increase your efficiency, right, as a team. But what's important about that is that it frees up your team to spend on higher value work, which is, as we all know, marketing is a busy department. We're always reacting rather than proacting things. So if we can free up time to finally spend some time on that strategy or, the next year's planning or a budget analysis, so on and so forth, all the things that we just never really have the time to put effort into, that's huge for me. As part of that is, the time savings is automation. So by automating tasks, we're saving time. But the way I look at automation is that, yes, it can make, take tasks and do them automatically for you. But if you can have that functionality, then suddenly you can perform work that was mundane or arduous or demotivating to your team. And you can have that done by these intelligent systems. So there's like a morale component there, which I don't think many people think about or speak about very often. And then what's also fascinating to me is that with automation, so the ability to do tasks automatically, you can also perform tasks that you would have deemed in like not very valuable prior. Like, so it wouldn't have been worth you going through the effort to do it manually because it's kind of low ROI work. Now, if you could automate all of that, it's suddenly viable and valuable. So I'll explore some examples of that soon. And then finally, these tools can help reduce human error as well when you're trawling through spreadsheets or editing content. Spell check and all that kind of thing is built in, and data analysis can be pretty accurate now. So it does, reduce human error, which is also important. So let's cover the top three kind of use cases in this space. So the first, I think, is on the search and research side. So I think that we are reaching a point now where Google is going to be less and less used unless they, can catch up in a big way. What we're seeing now is people are using tools like Perplexity to conduct their search that they'd normally do on Google. But what tools like Perplexity do is that they still search the internet for you. So it's like you going through the first page of Google results and clicking on every link and going to all the websites and then dealing with all the pop-ups and all their sales pitches just to get the information you need. The AI tool will do that all for you, and then it will write out an answer to your question in a very human-like form. And so you're getting one answer. You're not going, manually going through all the answers yourself. And it's still providing sources for where it found that information from, which is the key. And so there's a certain level of trust that you know that it's searching the internet, as opposed to the early days of ChatGPT, where you'd ask it something and it would give you an answer that sounds correct, but it's not necessarily connected to a source. And so you have that little bit of, is this actually correct? Now, granted, ChatGPT now does have that functionality to search on the internet, but my favorite is Perplexity, and I'll show you an example in just a minute. We're also seeing a lot of investment in the automation of tasks within platforms. And so I kind of split up automation into two. There's automating tasks within existing platforms, and then there's automating tasks manually, where you connect a whole bunch of different platforms together. So on the former, we're seeing tools like Candace mentioned already, Agentforce, which is Salesforce's new sort of AI assistant platform, where it allows you to connect a bunch of tasks within the Salesforce ecosystem to produce new and interesting tasks. And so, for example, you could train an agent to respond to customer requests. And so the customer might ask, hey, what's the update with my order? And Agentforce's agent can intelligently search the whole platform to fetch the information, use AI to write it into a human-like answer and send that answer automatically. So I'll give you an example of that in just a moment. And then there's the custom automation. So this is where you can completely customize tasks from scratch. It's a lot more complex, but there's a lot more power in it. So you can do all sorts of interesting things. I'm going to show you an example of how you could automate the generation of blog posts from scratch. So let me cover the research side of things first. And so I mentioned Perplexity already and how I think it's a great tool. Here's a quick sort of 1-2 punch of conducting, say, some market research. Let's say that you wanted to find you work in the chip manufacturing space, and so you go to Perplexity. You might have already had this top of mind, but you just want to make sure that you're certain of it. What are some of the best documents to look at when we're conducting competitor analysis in the chip manufacturing space? And so Perplexity's gone out, done a search, produced an answer for me at the bottom, but you can see this bar along the top here. It's showing me all the sources that it's got this information from. And so I'm reading through that and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Industry reports, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But then annual reports, these are publicly traded companies. They have to do an annual report, but I'm not going to sit here and read through 100 pages. I can get AI to do that for me. So that's where Google's Notebook LM comes in. It's a tool dedicated to searching documents and summarizing documents. And so what I've done is I took the answer from Perplexity and I was like, yep, I want to look at Intel's annual report from 2023. So I found that online because it's free, downloaded it, uploaded it into Google Notebook LM. And what's really interesting about this is that it creates this kind of interactive way to explore the document. And so as soon as I've uploaded it, on the right-hand side, you'll see under Notebook Guide, it has a bunch of different options. So help me create frequently asked questions, help me create a brief out of this, give me a table of contents, create a timeline of events. You can do all sorts of interesting things, but essentially you can ask the tool questions about the document. Or it can provide summaries for you, or it can even suggest questions for you to help explore it. And then just a really quick, weird feature that's exclusive to Google Notebook LM is that you can turn it into a podcast. So on the top right-hand side here, you'll see this deep dive conversation with two hosts. If you press generate, it creates two synthetic AI voices that discuss the document as if it's two people having a conversation, which is it's really interesting. I haven't really nailed down a use case for it yet. One I was thinking of would be if you want your team to interact with some of this research, instead of them reading through all this text, is like you can send them a little podcast and be like, hey team, listen to this interesting discussion about the Intel annual report from last year. Maybe it's a more engaging way for some of your staff who don't like reading but prefer to listen to things. That could be one use case. But anyway, it's pretty interesting stuff. Let's talk about automation. So I talked about automations within a platform. So this is an example that I talked about before with Agentforce from Salesforce. On the left-hand side here, you can create your own agent or AI assistant. You tell it what you want them to be able to do. You can customize that agent, so you can give them all sorts of rules, and here's their tone of voice, and here's the language they should use, and here's who you should notify when you do things. Then you can add files to train that agent. So here's our updated pricing, and here's some case studies, so on and so forth. And with that information, the agent can then use generative AI to create content and connect that content to different tasks. And so on the right-hand side, I already talked about this with order management. It can give a customer automatically an update to their order number by doing several tasks that would have to have been done manually before. And so that's saving a bunch of time. I think personally, I think what's more interesting is the SDR or your sales team outreach. So being able to customize your outreach for each of your prospects automatically without any human interaction. Now, we've been able to do that for a while, but only with generic messaging, right? So like for the longest time, we could do outreach automatically, upload a list of prospects and say, hey, email out to all these prospects and change their name and change their industry in the email, but the rest of the email remains the same. Now what we can do is come up with completely custom emails for each of these prospects based on all the data we have about them. So it's far more personalized, therefore it's far more likely to connect. But still, It's not perfect. And so I've put here on the top right P3, which means priority three. What I recommend is if you're going to do any kind of AI automated outreach, use it on your kind of lower priority leads. I still think the human touch is really powerful for your P1s, your top priority high ICP fit leads, because these tools do make mistakes, and I've seen it firsthand. I'll cover that in the limitations. And then finally, there's this idea of custom automation. So this is, like I said, instead of automating tasks within a platform and within the boundaries of that platform, you can create your own automations that connects all sorts of different platforms together. And so here's one example: is you could completely automate the generation of blog articles. So you could create hundreds or thousands of blog articles in a very short space of time using this kind of functionality, where you might use a tool like Apify, for example, which allows you to set up an agent that can scrape your competitors' websites, look for their latest blog posts, fetch the keywords that they've tried to focus on in that blog post, and then you write your own blog post about it. So on the right-hand side, there's an example of a prompt from the ChatGPT part of this automation. We've inserted all the keywords that you found, either from your SEO analysis tool or from scraping your website of your competitors. Feed those keywords into the brief. It'll spit out a blog post. You can then automate it so that that blog post goes into a spreadsheet, like a Google spreadsheet or an Airtable spreadsheet, for your team to review it. And then your team can just press approved on the spreadsheet, and it will publish it to your website if you set up all the automation. So it's super powerful. You can also use it for, like I said, with prospecting. You could scrape websites to find prospect information. So for example, some people are using these automations to create a bot that goes out, scrapes job listings, and finds, if you're, say, a consultant, find anyone who's looking for a marketing role. Now, as a consultant, I could find that company details and reach out to them and say, hey, looks like you're looking for a marketing role. Have you considered getting a consultant instead? And so there's some really interesting things you can do with automation, and you will be seeing a lot more investment in this space. This example I've showed you is from make.com, who I think is currently the leader in this space. But there'll be a lot happening here, so stay tuned. So I would say keep a couple of things in mind, though, in dealing with research and automation. So first of all, when conducting research, some of these tools are only trained, meaning the data that was fed into them only goes up to a certain point in time. So they may not be super relevant. They might not know things that have happened in the last week, month, 6 months. So you have to keep that in mind. And also, they may not be accurate all the time. So like I said before, these tools essentially predict the next word in a sentence. It is more complicated than that, but that's a simple way of looking at it. But because it does that, it can make mistakes. And so it's not always going to, for example, when it's summarizing information from research, it may not, pick out the things that you would emphasize. So, for example, Zoom meeting summaries, AI generated meeting summaries, or Otter.ai, who do that as well. They'll summarize your meeting and give you all the next actions, and that's great, but it may not actually emphasize the things that you would. It's only emphasizing the things that it predicts you would want to emphasize. So those are things to keep in mind. And finally, on the automation side of things, I would say it can be complicated to set up. It can be difficult to track the costs of all the different API calls that are made throughout the automation. So just because it can be automated doesn't mean it should be automated. You need to do some analysis to figure out, is it valuable? Is there ROI there? And then also there's some challenges involved with maintaining all the various connections in the automation along the way. If they make updates to the software, or if one of the webhooks or APIs change, then the whole thing can break. And so there is some complexity there. So let's talk about generating content. This is probably where you thought I was going to start. So this is really coming into generating text and audio. I'm going to talk about visual stuff after this. And so the benefits of using generative AI in this space are pretty clear. You've probably already experienced this. And if you haven't, I'd strongly recommend you go up to ChatGPT, create a free account, and start exploring right away. But what you can do is, obviously, you can accelerate the speed at which you create content, which we all know. But I think what's also interesting about that is the idea of recycling and adapting content. And so by recycling, I mean taking old content that you wrote a long time ago, pre-AI, and refreshing it using AI. So you can recycle it and give it a new lease of life. This is especially important for SEO articles, which do need to be periodically updated. And then adaptation is changing format of content. So taking a blog post and turning it into a LinkedIn post, a video script, a marketing email, so on and so forth. It's really quick at doing all of those things that we used to have to do manually. These tools can also help you maintain a consistent brand tone, like a tonality. But I've got an asterisk there, which I'll cover in the limitations because that's not always the case, and there are some things you can do to increase the likelihood of that. But if you have multiple team members creating content and not just one copywriter, for example, it's a great way to get them speaking the same language. And then finally, this kind of goes hand in hand with speed, but reducing the cost of creating content is fantastic. But what I like about that is that it also reduces the cost of taking risks, which I think are really important in marketing. Like we don't want to all be creating generic content or else, it's a race to the bottom. And so you do need to take risks. And now this reduces the cost of doing so. So here are the top three kind of use cases in this space. Copywriting, brainstorming, and then audio generation. So copywriting and brainstorming, they're kind of all done on the same platforms. And so I've put, the boxes here span both. ChatGPT, you all probably know by now. Claude is a similar one that Candace has already covered. Gemini is doing similar things. And then Llama by the people at Facebook. They've got an open source version of one of these language models, which is interesting. But essentially, these tools will help you create, like I've talked about, ad copy, blog posts, website content, marketing emails, social posts, anything you can think of. A lot of people even use them to draft emails, especially if they're sort of complicated emails. So I'm sure you've all used it already. I won't spend too much time on it. But they're also really powerful for brainstorming because yes, they're predicting the next thing in a sentence. And so you might think it will give you predictable results, which is true, but it can cast such a wider net than your brain is probably able to in that moment in time. And it can be really useful for generating ideas or minimizing writer's block and going wider in your thinking. And then finally, audio generation. So this is an interesting one too, text to audio. So you input a script and then an AI generated voice will read it out. Why this is interesting is that it reduces the time and cost of doing things like voiceovers for ads, voiceovers, product demos, things that were historically expensive and took time. The great thing about this too is if you land on a voice that you like, it'll always be consistent. You don't have to rely on the same voice actor every single time. They might be sick, they might stop doing it, who knows? So that's really great for consistency. So let's go into a couple of examples. Again, I said I wouldn't spend too much time on ChatGPT. I will highlight one thing though. Their Canvas feature is really interesting. So if you haven't seen it yet, the model is called ChatGPT 4.0 with Canvas. It's essentially, it spits out an answer. So I've asked it, for the sake of example, I asked it to create webinar, a landing page copy for this webinar that we're doing. We don't actually have a landing page, it's just for example. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on the prompt I use on the top left-hand side, where I said, use a conversational tone of voice, use compelling hooks, and do so in the style of Eugene Schwartz. I'll talk about that in the limitations. But what's interesting about this is that it spat out an answer. Answer's pretty good. What I can do now is highlight certain parts of that and interact with it and tell it to edit just that little piece. Whereas before, you had to respond to the chat, if you will, and say, hey, there's one headline that says this, can you please change it? Now I can just highlight it and ask it to change it. So, for example, I could say, hey, change this headline. I don't really like this headline. Give you some different options. Or I can say, hey, this headline is an example of a tone of voice that doesn't fit our brand. Can you edit the whole document to replace that tone of voice? So the editing component is really powerful, and I'd highly recommend you try it out. Then for the brainstorming, I sort of thought to myself, it'd be interesting if we came up with a visual motif or something that could visually represent this idea of AI or Gen AI essentials for marketers. And so I said, hey, what are some visual ideas that I could roll with just for the sake of example? And it gave me some examples here. And I picked one out that I liked where it said, hey, what about kitchen pantry items? The use everyday pantry staples, flour, sugar, salt, to kind of symbolize this idea of covering the essentials. And so I liked that idea and I thought, yep, I'll roll with that. I'm going to add one more thing to it though, before I show you later in the webinar about how that visually turned out, is I know that because these tools are predicting words or predicting pixels, it means they've been trained on well-known authors and well-known artists. And so to get good, consistent results, you kind of always want to give it one of these examples as a stylistic tone to base itself off. So that's why before, in the web copy example, I said, hey, do so in the style of Eugene Schwartz, who wrote a book called Breakthrough Advertising in the 60s. And it's kind of one of the founding books in advertising. And that's why for the visuals, I also want to do so in the style of a well-known artist. And so I thought to myself, well, I want these kitchen essentials to kind of have this kind of 3D friendly, high energy look. Who are some artists that are well known for creating content like that? And so ChatGPT knows this. It spat it out. I looked up some examples in Google. So I looked at Peter Tarker, found some of his content. I was like, yep, that kind of visual style looks good to me. And so now that I've done that, it all took a second, right? Like before, how would you have known what kind of artist is known for doing a style like that? Your best bet was trying Google and trawling through results. Now I've done it in 2 seconds. I'm going to show you what the output of that is a little bit later. So in terms of generating content, keep a couple of things in mind. The biggest one for me is that there is this really high risk of creating generic content. That's because, like I said, these tools are trained on all the content that already exists out there in the world, and so it's really good at generating content that sounds just like that. And if everyone else is using AI, it's all going to sound very, very similar. And in marketing, we can't afford to sound like everyone else. I mean, we know our customers have very limited attention spans. We have to really make a splash, and we have to differentiate ourselves, and we have to be novel. And so I would advise that anything that these tools spit out, still add the human touch on top, unless you get really good at prompt engineering to give you results that do appear to be novel, but they won't actually be novel because it's, like I said, predictable. So what I'm saying is that it's limited in its originality. What it's doing is that it's remixing all of the data that it's trained on rather than creating something that's actually net new and novel. And we all know as marketers that people gravitate towards something novel and more likely to resonate with something new. So that's my biggest thing to look out for. A couple of other things as well. They can be inaccurate in their outputs, like I mentioned in the research portion. There's this idea called hallucinations, where when it's predicting the next word in a sentence, it goes off on a tangent because you haven't given it the context to stay within the boundaries of, and so it can go off in a completely wrong direction. And I have put here, it can be hard to get team-wide tone consistency in your tone of voice, even though I said it's one of the benefits, because if all of your team members just opened up ChatGPT or Cloud or any of those tools now and said, hey, create a marketing newsletter about our Christmas campaign, they'll all get slightly different results. And so the only way you can get consistent tone of voice is creating your own GPT, it's called, and for example, in ChatGPT, where there's one master model that your team interacts with, and you can share the model with your team, and you train the model on all the resources that you think provide your tone of voice, and then they all use that same model to generate that consistency. So that's why there's some caveats there. And then finally, these tools can also reach limits in terms of input and output. And so quite often, I've seen this happen a lot. People will upload a huge PDF into ChatGPT and say, hey, what are the key points in this? They don't realize that ChatGPT is only looking at the first 4 or 6 pages, depending on what version of ChatGPT you're using, paid or otherwise. So be careful of that. And then finally, I'm going to talk about design. So design and video. What's interesting here is, again, sure, it makes things faster. You can create visuals much faster than you ever could before. But it also lowers the barriers to entry, meaning that now anyone on the team can create visuals rather than having to lean on a designer. And so all those people that say, oh, I'm terrible at drawing, I'm terrible at graphic design. Well, it doesn't matter anymore, because all you need to be able to do is explain what you'd like to see, and these tools can help you get there with a bunch of caveats. So what's great about that is it helps promote visual experimentation and concepting. So now you can, for example, when you actually are writing a brief for a visual that does need to be done by a designer because of the limitations of AI, you can use these tools to help, come up with some ideas and say, hey, I was thinking something like this, and you use something you created in AI just to help them visually brief them and provide concepts. And then finally, depending on where you're at with your resources and your current branding in your company, there is this possibility that if you use AI correctly in this space, you could really significantly upgrade all of your visuals across the board. But again, there are some limitations, so I'll cover those. The top 3 places we've seen this kind of technology being used: generative AI in imagery and video. So on the left-hand side, obviously, we've all probably experimented with this already. The likes of Midjourney, DALL-E, which is OpenAI's model, which is now baked into ChatGPT. These you give it some text and say, hey, create something from this text, and it predicts the next pixel next to the next pixel next to the next pixel to eventually create this full image. This can be really great for coming up with logo ideas, but not actually logos. I'll cover that. I think it's really best used for graphics for your website, so standalone graphics that you then cut out and then put on your website or in your presentations. Blog post headers, which are kind of low stakes design work that we don't need to look perfect. But I put a couple of other examples here on the left-hand side that aren't necessarily just creating images from text. I've got Aragon.ai. This is one of very many tools out there that create professional-looking headshots for you. You might have seen this already, where you upload a bunch of photos of yourself and then it creates like LinkedIn-style professional headshots, which is whatever. That's interesting, I guess. But where I see the value of that is getting consistent imagery for the team section of your about page on your website. When you're building a new website and the developer's like, hey, I need some good photos of the team, and you're like, well, I'm gonna have to hire a photographer, or they're all gonna look completely different. That's a good way and cheap way to get them all looking very similar. And then I put Gamma here as well. Gamma AI is a tool that's dedicated, so a native tool for creating presentations, so from scratch. And I'll cover an example of that in a second. And this idea of video transformation, there's really two big players in the market right now. One, and the most common one is called Runway. So this is either text to video, so you write some text, spits out a video, image to video, upload an image, and then it'll create a video out of the image, or video to video. And I'll show you some examples of that. That's going to be really powerful because we all know right now that video is one of the best forms of content, not only on the likes of Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, but also obviously TikTok. So video is key. We got to get good at that. And then finally, there's this idea of visual manipulation. So taking images and changing them with AI. And so, for example, pixelbin.io is a tool that can do all sorts of different things, but I use it personally, the free version, for just quickly upscaling blurry images. You put it in there and it spits out a sharper looking image. But you can also use tools like Canva and Photoshop to generate elements within the image. So you can say, hey, I want to change this picture of this person's face into a car, or whatever it is you want to do. You can manipulate the image using AI. So let's look at some examples. Remember I showed you this idea before. I was like, hey, I want to find a well-known artist in this space because I know, and we all know now, that these tools are trained on all of the well-known artists from the history. And so let's find some well-known artists in this space and use that in our prompt to generate images. And so what I did first is I did this within ChatGPT, just because I was already in there, and I said, hey, create a bunch of icons in the style of Peter Tarker that represent these kitchen essentials. And this is what ChatGPT spat out. And I wasn't overly fussed with it. And personally, I actually don't really resonate with DALL-E or OpenAI's image generation model at the moment. That might change. But my favorite by far is Midjourney. And so I highly recommend you all create a Midjourney account if you haven't played with it yet. And so I said, did the same prompt, exactly the same prompt. And the output was on the left-hand side is far closer to what Peter Tarker's style actually is, right? And so I was like, yep, that's much better. And then Midjourney gives me all these options in the middle here where I can do things with it. And so you can upscale it to make it higher res. But what I like about this tool is that there's these two options called pan and zoom. So pan meaning like if I pressed up, down, left, or right, it's basically telling the tool, move the camera to the left, what would it see if we expanded it out that way? Or if we zoomed out, what would we see? And so the example on the right-hand side is I zoomed out, and you can see what it's done is it's got all the same icons in the middle, but around the edge, it's just added a whole new bunch of icons for me because I zoomed out. And so you can do some pretty interesting things with that zoom and zoom out function, and I recommend you play with it. So then I thought, okay, let's take this further. I've got this graphic motif now. I'm quite happy with this set of icons. What can I do with it? Well, maybe I'd use it in our presentation. So I thought I'm going to ask ChatGPT to create use the API with Canva to create a presentation for me about this. And so I inputted all of the content that we're running through in today's webinar, and I put it into here, and I said, yep, help me create this. And then through the API, what it's done is it said, yep, Canva's returned these templates on the left-hand side. Pick a template, and then we'll shove your content in there. So I scrolled through them, and I sort of found one that looked okay, and I did that. And number 2 here, what we see in the middle is what it spat out. And it was just really generic. And this is just the problem with a lot of this AI generated content is that it's super generic. So what I did is I added the human touch. So I went into Canva, I picked a different template, added the brand colors, the green colors we were using earlier in today's presentation, shoved that image in of the icons and used the remove background feature on that. And so now, in the space of a few minutes, I've got a visual that's, exactly like what I was kind of hoping for very, very quickly without relying on a designer whatsoever, right? This probably isn't the most sophisticated example, but it's just showing you an example of how you might actually use it in your marketing team. Really, really quickly, I want to touch on this one. I talked about Gamma AI. This is when you create presentations from scratch, or you can upload an existing presentation like a PowerPoint and say, transform this into a different design. This is what you're seeing here is an example of all of the text to presentation. So I uploaded all the text and said, create a presentation for me. It gave me some templates to pick, and I picked one template. What it's done is it's looked at the content and said to itself, okay, I think on this slide here, this probably suits having bullet points. On this slide here, clearly it needs to be some images. And so it's kind of figured this all out on its own, then used generative AI to come up with the actual pictures as well. These are all AI generated pictures. And so you can see how that'd be pretty effective if you need to create something quickly. That's probably better than what you could do yourself, but it won't be as good as if you were using a proper branded template like in PowerPoint or Google Slides, where a designer has created one for you. You're going to run into consistency issues if your whole team is using this tool. And so I'll cover that again shortly. I do want to also show you an example of Runway. I talked about video, creating video. This here is an example of a creator on YouTube called Atomic Gains, where he has got a video here of a mannequin and he's transformed it with a prompt on the right-hand side to completely change the way it looks. Here he is holding up some cardboard on the left, and on the right-hand side, it's changed into whatever he's put in the prompt. You can also take older content. So the example is you're going to see here is, I think, Mickey Mouse. But you could take old content of your own and transform it, in a matter of seconds. And so that's really interesting, right? You can, like, the mind boggles at how creative you could be with this video stuff. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that, in our feeds very shortly. But there are a couple of downsides here. So my apologies, I can't seem to get to the next slide. Won't let me. There you go. I'll come to the downsides in a moment. I also want to show you, rather than showing you what a YouTuber has done, I took that image that I created in Midjourney and I thought to myself, what else can I do with these images? Oh, what if on our landing page, I had these 3D rotating icons? And so I put that screenshot into Runway and said, turn this, make a video of these rotating. So it's simulated what it thinks these icons would look like if they rotated. Like, it has no reference point for what these things should look like when they're rotated. It's done it on its own. And so what I can do is now cut those out using CapCut or some sort of video software, and then I can place it on our website, and it replaces the old static, boring icons that we've all seen a million times from our icon packs. So that's just another quick example of using the video tool in a practical way. So let's talk about downsides. I talked about this idea of earlier in the creating content, which is this idea of originality. So this we're going to see this kind of stock or AI generated look. I can already kind of tell when something's AI generated in the visual space. You've probably been able to catch on as well by now. And so just like we've kind of all been fatigued by the classic stock images we've seen on websites for the last 10 years, which is like, people in the office shaking hands and smiling and on their laptop. We all know that's stock imagery, right? And so it doesn't really resonate with us anymore. I think the same thing's going to happen here if you're not using it in a creative way. If you're not using it properly, these AI generated images will look similar. There's also a very high risk of these looking inconsistent. So if your team is creating imagery and all of them are using different prompts, even if you're using this a stylistic benchmark, like I had Peter Tarker before, you still will get slightly different results from each other. And so it actually is really tricky to get very, very consistent. So if you're building a website and hoping to use AI generated content across the whole website, you're going to struggle for all of those images to look the same, honestly. So it's a huge downside at the moment, but these tools are all working on it because it seems to be the number one thing that people are asking for is, hey, give us more consistency. Limitations, they do struggle, these tools, with producing customized designs. So, I mean, like being very, very explicit in what you're looking for. So give me a picture of a person at a train station holding up their right hand with 4 fingers, and on their shirt it says this. It's not going to get all those details correct. And so if you're trying to produce something really detailed or complex, it's going to have struggles. It also, like I said before, because these models are trained on existing data, it doesn't know anything about your specific brand guidelines. You can try and tell it what your brand guidelines are and say, hey, here are the color schemes that we use and all that kind of thing. But it's going to give you very sporadic results because it's not trained on that data. And then finally, text generation within an image is a weak point too. You've probably seen that too, where it gets letters wrong, they look wonky, it repeats the word all over the image. They seem to struggle with creating text inside of the image, and then editing the image as well. So the output is always a flat image, right? Which means it's not broken up into layers. So you can't move things around and hide things. It's like one fully baked image, which means it's hard to make custom changes to that specific image. And here's just an example of a limitation. So this is HubSpot Breeze, and this is not just HubSpot Breeze. This is every tool out there right now that's creating landing pages or websites using AI. look at this. It's very, very generic, right? Like this clearly needs the human touch. If you created a website that looked like that, I'd be very surprised if it resonates. And so what I'm saying is you can't just rely on these things from the get-go. Whether it's content, video, imagery, you need to take it and then edit it, add the human touch, or get really, really good at the input side of things, get really good at the prompting side of things, so that you get better outputs. And there's a whole art to that. So my closing thoughts in terms of what I've spoken about is remember the whole smart device era, maybe 10 years ago more. There was smartphones, smart TVs, smart this, smart lights, smart that. Soon the smart's going to get dropped, just like it did for all those things. Now we just have phones and TVs and light switches. The same thing's going to happen with AI because smart is now a commodity and AI is very quickly becoming a commodity as well. And so soon the AI part doesn't really matter anymore. It's just the use case that matters. And on a similar note to that, I would be aware of all of these companies at the moment, especially legacy companies, so old companies that have been around for a while, slapping on the word AI onto their product just because they're trying to, ride the hype chain. And it's very likely either not real generative AI, it's probably just traditional kind of software algorithms, equations, or they've just embedded something like ChatGPT into the product, which you could have just done yourself. So just be cautious of that. And so what I would say is while we are seeing all this growth in these kind of native AI tools, like what I showed you before, the Gamma AI creating presentations or Runway with the video stuff, these are like purpose built to do one thing really well, is that you have a chance right now to, there's a short window where you can take advantage of this while it's still cheap-ish and easy to play with and free accounts and all of that before they consolidate. Because eventually, as we've all seen with the dot-com boom and with everything else, eventually these consolidate and there's a few big players in the market that kind of that you will use for all of these. Now's a really interesting time to get in quick and experiment while it's you can get some interesting results and a potential competitive advantage. So with that said, I'll hand over back to Candice, who will just wrap us up and talk about what you can do next to take advantage of this.
Thank you, Rory. That was absolutely fascinating. And I love your closing thoughts. It sounds like we're really on quite a ride here with generative AI capabilities. And I love your perspectives of starting to get in and get entrenched in it quickly to leverage the capabilities and learn. Well, we would love to just kind of close today's session with some observations. So very organically in our work with clients, we've seen a lot of requests come through about how do we incorporate generative AI technologies into our marketing organization and how we do work. And so what we've done is we've really come up with 7 key considerations that we are educating our clients on. And a lot of this is focused on first and foremost defining your use case. So really understanding what is it you're trying to solve for, and can you really leverage technology in solving for that challenge? The other thing we work with clients on is really assessing how much as human interaction is required. So just as you saw Rory present today, and when I was going through some of the earlier tools, a lot of the technologies still require you to come in and monitor the output or make adjustments or know how to do the right prompts. So we really help customers assess where that human action is required and how to hone that. And also a key consideration is scalability when you're defining the use cases. So how can it help you achieve more faster and help you scale your marketing execution? Some of the other key considerations that we work with clients on is around generative AI governance and usage policies. This has been a big request from our client base, and also helping them define what does successful outcomes look like and what constitutes that a good win for the company. And then also really building that business case around the ROI and helping educate stakeholders around the rollout to help drive adoption. So what we typically do is we support clients with helping them ramp up their teams in the skills of generative AI tools, and then develop that use case, help them with the budgeting and the ROI calculations. And then we do this in a way where we bring it to market and support you through the campaign launch of an existing campaign that you have planned. So you kind of get a double win through this because you get a successful campaign launch, and then we augment that with the generative AI tools that are fit for purpose for your organization. And then we also provide, again, that ongoing constitution of a successful project, what this actually results in, and how do we help you support your unique goals. So if you'd like to understand any of this further of what we presented today around the use cases, the benefits, and some of the limitations and downsides, please reach out. We would love to hear from you. Please book a 30-minute call. There's a link here on the page. You can also reach out to me or Rory directly, and we would love to have a conversation with you to support you with your marketing generative AI needs. Thank you so much again for your time today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Cheers.